The moment the rope snaps behind me, I already know this is the end of my life as anyone knew it. I'm falling. Not tripping, not stumbling, falling. Straight down into a black throat of stone that swallows the sky whole. Wind screams past my ears. Somewhere above me, getting smaller by the second, is the outline of the one man I trusted with everything, Garrick Thorne, my party leader, my so-called brother-in-arms. He's not falling. He's standing on the ledge, watching me drop, and he's smiling. That's the part that gets me. Not the fall, the smile. 10 seconds ago we were celebrating. 10 seconds ago I thought we'd finally cleared the outer ring of the Dragon Abyss together. Thought we were about to be legends. Thought Garrick actually meant it when he clapped my shoulder and called me the backbone of the team. Then the ground opened under my feet, and I understood. There was no accident. There was no crumbling ledge. There was a lever, and Garrick's hand was on it. I hit black water so hard it knocks the scream right out of my lungs, and everything goes dark. At the time, I had no idea how far down the Dragon Abyss actually went, or what waited at the bottom, or what I was about to become. If I had, I might have thanked him. I wake up on a shelf of wet stone, coughing up water that tastes like rust and something worse, something old. My ribs feel like they've been stepped on by a horse. My mana core is a dead coal in my chest, and the first thing I see when my eyes finally focus is a skeleton in rusted plate armor sitting against the cave wall across from me, sword still gripped in its bony hand, like it's been waiting centuries for someone to walk in and keep it company. Great. Just great. I want to lie there and feel sorry for myself. I don't get the chance. Because that's when the whispering starts. It isn't in my ears. It's in my skull, low and cold, like something ancient clearing its throat for the first time in 1,000 years. Harvest, it says. One word, dragged out slow, syllable by syllable. Harvest. I freeze. I'm 19 years old. I have exactly one useful skill, item appraisal, the kind of ability that gets you assigned to carry everyone else's bags. And I am lying at the bottom of the most feared pit on the continent, listening to a voice that isn't mine tell me to harvest a dead man's corpse like it's the most natural thing in the world. I should be terrified. I am terrified. But underneath the terror there's something else, something sharper. Curiosity clawing its way up through the fear. Because I remember the stories now. Everyone in the guild called the Dragon Abyss a grave. Thousands of adventurers have gone in over the centuries. Almost none of them came back out. The official reports always said the same thing. Bodies too decomposed to identify, equipment lost, cause of death unknown. Nobody ever asked why the corpses were always found without their skill cores intact. I crawl toward the skeleton anyway, because what else am I going to do? Sit here and wait to die of thirst next to it? My hand shakes when it touches the cold armor, and the second my palm makes contact with the bone underneath, the whispering voice roars to life. Heat floods through my arm like a brand. I yank my hand back, gasping, and for one terrifying second I think I've been cursed, poisoned, marked for something worse than death. Then the pain fades, and in its place is a feeling I have never once experienced in 19 years of being the useless one, the extra pair of hands, the guy who checks whether the loot is real gold or gilded junk. Power. Actual, physical power, humming under my skin like a second heartbeat. I stare at my own hands like they belong to someone else. Somewhere below me in the dark, the whispering voice, old, patient, amused in a way that makes the hair on my neck stand up, speaks again. Interesting, it says. It has been a very long time since anyone came down here who could actually hear me. At the time, I had no idea I was the first living person in 300 years to survive first contact with whatever was waiting at the bottom of the Dragon Abyss. What I did know was simpler. Garrick Thorne thought he'd just killed his weakest teammate to cover up something. He had no idea what he'd actually done was hand a starving man the keys to a kingdom of corpses. I should back up, because none of this makes sense without knowing who I used to be. My name is Rowan Ashwood, and up until about an hour ago, I was the 5th member of a 4-person hero party. The kind of role nobody respects because nobody's supposed to notice you're doing it. Garrick Thorne was our leader, a golden-haired sword prodigy the capital practically worshipped, the kind of man who got free drinks just for walking into a tavern. Beside him stood Sable Vane, our tactician, cold and precise, the one who planned every raid down to the second, and never once looked at me like I was a person instead of a resource. And then there was Ren Calloway, our healer. The only one who ever actually thanked me when I patched a wound or found a hidden trap before it took someone's leg off. I joined them 2 years ago because my appraisal skill let me identify cursed items and hidden traps before anyone else even noticed them there. I wasn't flashy. I couldn't cut a monster in half or heal a dying ally with a wave of my hand. But I kept us alive in 100 small ways nobody bothered to write ballads about. That should have been enough. It wasn't. 3 days before the fall, I overheard something I was never supposed to hear. Garrick and Sable, voices low in the war tent, talking about a bounty on the Dragon Abyss posted by the royal court. A fortune large enough to buy a noble title, but with one brutal condition attached. The reward only paid out for a party of 4, not 5. 4 names on the contract, 4 shares of glory, 4 seats at the coronation banquet when the king handed out titles to the heroes who finally cracked the abyss's outer ring. I was the 5th name, the one that had to disappear. I told myself I was wrong. I told myself Garrick wouldn't do that to me. Not after 2 years, not after everything. I spent that last night before the expedition lying awake, replaying every memory I had of him, looking for proof that I was overreacting. The time he'd carried me 2 miles on his back after a hydra clipped my leg, the time he'd given up his own share of a bounty so I could afford a better set of appraisal lenses. Surely a man who did those things doesn't casually decide to erase you 3 days later. That's what I told myself, right up until the moment the ground opened under my feet and proved every single one of those memories had just been the setup for the punchline. That's the part that makes me want to laugh now, lying here at the bottom of a hole with a skeleton for company. I had no choice but to keep pretending I hadn't heard anything, because if I confronted them, and I was wrong, I'd look paranoid and pathetic. And if I confronted them and I was right, well, I'd just be speeding up my own funeral. Turns out I didn't need to speed anything up. Garrick did that for me, right on schedule, the moment we crossed the outer ring and he decided I'd served my purpose. He picked the wrong person to throw away. Down here, in the wet dark, the whispering voice keeps talking to me while I catch my breath. It doesn't have a name yet, not one it's willing to share, but it explains things in fragments, like it's testing how much my mind can hold before it breaks. This place isn't just a hole in the ground. It's the corpse of something enormous, an ancient dragon, dead for longer than any kingdom above has existed, its body dissolved into the stone itself, its will still lingering in the dark like smoke that never quite clears. Every adventurer who has ever died in the Dragon Abyss left something behind. A skill, a technique, a fragment of whatever made them who they were in their final desperate moment. And normally, those fragments just rot in the dark forever. Useless, because nobody has ever been able to hear the dragon's whisper and survive touching what it points them toward, until me. That's when the system carved itself into my vision for the first time. Not the crude notification I'd flinched at with the skeleton, but a full status window, cold blue light hanging in the black air in front of my face. I read it 3 times before it sinks in. This isn't some cheap looting trick. This is a bloodline ability, buried inside me my entire life. Apparently waiting for the exact moment I hit rock bottom, literally, to wake up. Every skill I take from the dead down here has to be earned. I can't just walk around touching corpses and getting free power. I have to survive what they didn't. I sit with that thought for a long moment, turning it over the way I used to turn over a suspicious item before I'd risk touching it barehanded. A bloodline trait doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It sleeps. It waits for the right conditions, the right desperation, the right proof that its host has nothing left to lose. 19 years of being overlooked, underestimated, quietly written out of every story that mattered, and it took getting thrown into a pit to finally wake the one part of me that was never actually ordinary at all. That should terrify me more than it does. Instead, for the first time since I hit the water, I actually smile. Because Garrick Thorne just made the single biggest mistake of his charmed, golden life. He threw the least threatening person he knew into the one place on the continent that turns nobodies into monsters. The first few days are brutal in a way I don't have the words to properly describe, so I won't waste time trying to make it sound pretty. I'm starving. I'm cold in a way that gets into your bones and stays there. I have exactly one working skill and a dead man's defensive art I don't fully understand yet, and every shadow in this cave system moves like it wants to eat me. I find a cracked lantern rune that still holds a spark of light. I find a stream of clean water threading through the lower tunnels. I find, on the 3rd day, my first real fight. A pack of hollow-eyed crawlers, pale things with too many joints, swarming out of a fissure the second my light touches them. I almost die. I want to be honest about that, because nothing about this is easy or quick. I take a claw across my forearm that opens me to the bone, and for one long, white-hot second, I genuinely believe this is where the story ends. 19 years old, forgotten at the bottom of a hole, because a golden boy wanted an extra share of gold. Then the borrowed skill kicks in. Iron Guard's last stand isn't flashy. It doesn't glow, it doesn't roar, it doesn't look good in a highlight reel. It just turns my exhausted, bleeding arms into something that will not, cannot, break, for exactly as long as I need it to. I plant my feet the way the skeleton must have planted his, 300 years ago, in his own final stand against whatever swarmed him in the dark, and I hold the line long enough to turn the fight around. When the last crawler falls, twitching, into the black water, I stand there shaking, and the whisper in my skull sounds almost pleased. "You held," it says. "Good. The dead respect that. I don't sleep that night. I sit with my back against warm stone, and I think about Garrick's face right before he pulled the lever, and I make myself a promise. I am going to survive this place. Not just survive it. I am going to become something this pit has never produced before. And then I am going to climb back out and let Garrick Thorne see exactly what he threw away." The whisper doesn't let me rest on that promise for long. Rest is a luxury the Dragon Abyss doesn't hand out for free, and the very next morning I learn exactly how true that is. I find a second chamber, smaller than the first, half flooded, and inside it a nest of things I still don't have a name for. Pale, segmented, faster than anything should be, that has no visible eyes. I nearly lose an arm figuring out the hard way that they hunt by sound. I learn to move through Windstep in complete silence instead of just at speed, and that single adjustment, that one desperate correction made in the dark with my heart hammering against my ribs, is the difference between walking out of that chamber and becoming one more skeleton for the next unlucky harvester to find. Small victories start stacking up after that, and each one changes something in how I carry myself. I stop flinching every time the whisper speaks in my skull. I start reading the cave systems the way I used to read cursed items back when appraisal was my only useful skill. Patterns inside patterns, danger telegraphing itself if you just know where to look. I catch myself, more than once, laughing out loud at something, alone in the dark, and it takes me a second every time to remember that laughing used to be something other people gave me permission to do, back when I was still trying to earn my place at Garrick's table instead of building one of my own. Great. Just great. Turns out I didn't need his table after all. The days blur together after that, in the way days do when you're too busy staying alive to count them properly. I find more remains scattered through the upper caverns. An archer whose wind-step technique lets me move like the air barely notices me, a battle mage whose ember lance skill turns my bare hands into something that can actually hurt the things down here, instead of just annoying them. Every harvest costs me something first. A fight, a near-death scrape, a test the dragon's lingering will seems to design specifically to see whether I deserve what I'm about to take. And every time I pass the test, the whisper in my skull gets a little less distant, a little more like a presence standing just behind my shoulder. Then I find the journal. It's tucked inside a collapsed shrine 2 levels down, wrapped in oilcloth that somehow survived the damp, sitting next to the most intact corpse I've found yet. A man in weathered black leathers, a broken compass clutched in one skeletal hand, a title etched into his belt buckle that makes my stomach drop the second I read it. The Hollow King. I've heard that name before, whispered in taverns, in half-forgotten guild records. The greatest solo adventurer of the last century, the man who mapped more of the Dragon Abyss than anyone in history before he vanished into it and never came back. I open the journal with hands that won't stop shaking, and what I read inside changes everything. The Hollow King didn't die by accident. He went looking for something specific at the bottom of the abyss, a truth about why the pit exists at all, why kingdoms have spent centuries quietly funding expeditions into it under the polite fiction of monster culling, why the royal court keeps posting bounties large enough to tempt ambitious young sword prodigies and their tacticians into risking everything. The dragon buried at the bottom of this pit didn't simply die of old age or a hero's blade, the way the old stories claim. According to the journal, it was betrayed, sealed alive by the very kingdom that later built its capital on the strength of the power it stole from that betrayal. Its blood became the founding family's bloodline gifts. Its bones became the foundation stones of the royal palace. And its dying will, unable to fully pass on, sank into the abyss and has been waiting, patient as stone, for someone worth speaking to, waiting for someone like me. I sit there in the dark for a long time after I finish reading, the journal open in my lap, and I finally understand why the whisper in my skull sounded so interested the moment I touched that first skeleton. It isn't just testing whether I can survive. It's been alone down here for 300 years, watching failed expedition after failed expedition die screaming, waiting for a host who could actually carry what it has left to give. That's when the reversal hits, the one I never saw coming. Garrick Thorne isn't just a golden boy who got greedy for a bigger share of glory. According to the pages the Hollow King left behind, the Thorne bloodline is one of the original founding families, descendants of the very nobles who sealed the dragon centuries ago. Garrick didn't push me into the abyss to steal my share of a bounty. He pushed me in because Sable Vane discovered, buried in the guild's oldest archive, that the Ashwood name, my name, the name I always assumed meant nothing, appears in the same founding-era records as Thorne. Tied to the dragon, tied to whatever's down here. They didn't throw away a nobody. They tried to erase a loose end. I should be furious. I am furious. But underneath the fury there's something colder now. Something that wasn't there before I hit that water. Clarity. Every skill I've harvested, every fight I've survived, every night I've spent freezing in the dark has been building toward this moment, and I finally understand what the dragon's will has actually been offering me this whole time. Not just power, payment. 3 centuries of stolen skills, stolen strength, stolen lives, all sitting untouched in the dark because nobody could hear the offer until now. The whisper doesn't wait for me to ask the question out loud. You want to go back up, it says, and I feel something that might be amusement curling through the words. You want them to see what they made. I can help with that. But first you'll have to survive me. I don't understand what that means until the ground starts shaking. The lower chamber the journal led me to isn't just another cave. It's a cathedral of black stone, ribs of ancient bone arching overhead like the world's worst chandelier, and at the center of it, half buried in centuries of collapsed rubble, is something that used to be a dragon and still, impossibly, isn't quite dead. Not a full body. A remnant, skull the size of a small house, eye sockets glowing with a dim green fire. Wings fossilized into the stone around it, like it tried to fly one last time and simply ran out of time. It opens its eyes when I step into the chamber, and every torch, every rune, every scrap of light I'm carrying gutters at once. So, it's you. The voice isn't in my skull this time, it's everywhere, shaking dust from the ceiling, and for the first time since I hit the water 3 weeks ago, real, bone-deep fear locks my knees in place. Every skill I've harvested feels like a child's toy compared to whatever's waking up in front of me. I've survived crawlers and rothounds and a swarm of things I still don't have names for. None of it prepared me for standing in front of the thing that built this entire nightmare with its own dying breath. It doesn't attack right away. It watches me, green fire eyes tracking every twitch, and then it does something I never expected. It laughs. Low, rumbling, ancient, and somehow, impossibly, almost fond. 300 years of failures, it says, and the first one worth speaking to walks in wearing a dead knight's stance and a dead archer's feet. Show me what you've earned, little harvester. Show me you deserve the rest of what I have to give. The fight that follows is the hardest thing I have ever survived. I'm not going to pretend it's clean or heroic. I get thrown into a wall hard enough to black out for half a second. I burn through Ember Lance so fast the skill actually starts to feel hollow in my chest, like I'm scraping the bottom of a well. Windstep is the only thing keeping me alive, letting me slide out of the path of a tail sweep that turns solid stone to gravel 3 feet from where I'd been standing. And through all of it, Ironguard's last stand holds the line every single time my body wants to simply stop. There's a moment, maybe halfway through the fight, when I actually consider giving up. My legs are shaking, my mana core feels scraped raw. The remnant's tail catches my shoulder on a near miss and spins me into a pillar hard enough that stars burst behind my eyes. And for one long, terrible breath, I lie there in the rubble and think about how easy it would be to just stop moving. Nobody would know. Nobody would ever find out whether I'd made it this far or given up 3 feet short of the finish line. Then I remember the smile. Garrick's smile, right before the lever, easy and warm and completely untroubled by what he was about to do to someone who trusted him. And something in my chest that isn't rage, exactly, and isn't fear either, hauls me back onto my feet. I don't win by being stronger. I win because I stop trying to be someone I'm not. Instead of fighting the remnant head-on the way a sword prodigy like Garrick would, I use everything I've learned about this place. Every trap I've disarmed with appraisal. Every collapsing tunnel I've mapped in my head without even meaning to. Every borrowed instinct from 3 dead strangers who all, in their own final moments, chose to hold their ground instead of running. I lure the remnant into the weakest section of the cathedral ceiling, the one the Hollow King's journal warned me never to stand under, and when 300 years of buried stone finally comes down, I'm already moving, already clear, already reaching for the one thing the collapse exposes at the base of the skull. A single scale, black as the void between stars, still warm after 3 centuries. I press my palm against it, and the world goes white. Power doesn't just flood into me this time, it rewrites me. Every borrowed skill I've carried up to this point stops feeling like a patchwork of stolen fragments and starts feeling like it was always mine, stitched together by something ancient and patient that finally, after 300 years, has someone worth trusting with what's left of it. When I open my eyes, the chamber is silent. The remnant's green fire has gone dark, and the whisper in my skull isn't a whisper anymore. "We're not finished, little harvester," it says. "Warm now instead of cold. Amused instead of ancient and distant. You've only cleared the first ring, but you've got what you need to climb out. Go show them what they threw away." I do climb out. It takes another 6 days, 6 days of using every skill I've earned to fight my way back up through tunnels I mapped on the way down. And when I finally pull myself over the lip of the dragon abyss and back into open sky, the sun is so bright it feels like a physical blow. I don't go straight to the guild. I clean myself up first, quietly, in a border town 2 days out, because I want my first appearance back in the capital to be exactly as loud as I plan for it to be. And when I do walk back through the guild hall doors 3 weeks after everyone assumed I'd died screaming at the bottom of the world's most feared pit, the first person I see is Garrick Thorne, standing at the front of the hall in a nobleman's coat, mid-speech, accepting congratulations for clearing the outer ring of the dragon abyss. He had no idea what was coming. The entire hall goes silent the moment I step through the doors. Someone drops a glass. Sablevane's calculating expression cracks for the first time I've ever seen. And Garrick, golden, charmed, untouchable Garrick Thorne, turns pale as a corpse himself, because standing in front of him isn't the useless fifth wheel he shoved into a hole to die. "Rowan!" My name comes out of his mouth like it hurts him just to say it. He recovers fast, the way men who've spent their whole lives being applauded always do, and forces a smile back onto his face for the crowd behind him. "You're alive. Thank the gods. We searched for you. You pulled a lever," I say, and my voice comes out quieter than I expect, quiet enough that the whole hall leans in to catch it. "I watched you do it. I watched you smile while you did it." The silence that follows is the loudest sound I've ever heard. Ren Calloway pushes forward through the crowd, and for one terrible second I brace myself for her to defend him, the way I always assumed she would if it ever came down to a choice. Instead, her eyes go straight to my hands, to the faint black shimmer still clinging under my skin, where the dragon's last will settled in, and something in her face breaks open, relief and guilt, and a question she doesn't dare ask out loud in front of this many witnesses. Sablevane recovers first, the way tacticians always do, already calculating angles, already reaching for a version of events that keeps her clean. "There's clearly been some kind of misunderstanding," she starts, and I almost laugh, because that's exactly the kind of sentence a founding family bloodline uses, right before it tries to bury a second body. "There isn't," I say. "I read the journal, Sable. I know whose name is buried next to Thorne in the founding-era archives. I know exactly why I had to disappear. I watch that land. I watch it land on Garrick's face first, the golden charm cracking straight down the middle, and for one honest, unguarded second, I see something underneath it that almost looks like fear. Good. He should be afraid. He built his entire life on the assumption that the person he threw away would stay thrown away. He had no idea what he'd actually done was hand a starving, forgotten, invisible man a debt 300 years old, and the power to finally start collecting on it. The blade is an inch from my throat before I even see it move. I don't dodge. I don't have time to dodge. One heartbeat, I'm standing in the guild hall doorway watching Garrick's golden face crack open in front of 200 witnesses, and the next heartbeat, a man in guild livery I don't recognize is lunging out of the crowd with a dagger aimed for the soft place under my jaw, and there is nothing I can do about it except brace for the end of a story that just barely started. Except my arm moves anyway. Not because I tell it to. Ironguard's last stand flares to life on its own, cold and instant. my forearm snapping up and catching the strike dead in the bone-white grip of a dead knight's stance I never consciously called for. Steel screams against skin that shouldn't be able to stop steel. The man's eyes go wide with something close to panic, like he expected this to be easy, like somebody told him it would be easy, and I feel the whisper stir in the back of my skull, low and amused even now. "There it is," it says. "Faster than you." I don't have a clever line for the man trying to open my throat in front of the entire guild. I just grab his wrist with my other hand and squeeze until something pops, and he screams and the dagger clatters against stone floor that's gone dead silent except for that one small, ugly sound. 2 guild guards finally shove through the crowd and drag him off me, and I'm left standing there in the doorway with my heart slamming against my ribs and my arm still humming with borrowed strength I didn't ask it to use. Nobody in that hall knows what just happened. Not really. They saw a man attack me and fail. They didn't see the half-second where my own body reacted before I did, like something underneath my skin has started making decisions without waiting for permission. That should terrify me more than it does. 3 weeks ago, I couldn't hold a blade steady without both hands shaking. Now something in me moves faster than fear. At the time, I didn't understand what I was looking at. I thought it was luck. I thought maybe the dragon's will had simply sharpened my reflexes the way it had sharpened everything else about me since I climbed out of that pit. It would be a while yet before I understood that what happened in that doorway wasn't luck. And it wasn't a gift either. It was the first sign that whatever I'd become down in the dark wasn't finished changing me. But that's later. Right now, I've got a bleeding stranger on the floor. A hall full of people staring at me like I just grew a second head, and Garrick Thorne standing exactly where I left him 30 seconds ago, his composure cracked clean down the middle. Rowan. His voice is different now, quieter, the kind of quiet a man uses when he's realized the thing he buried has climbed back out and is standing in front of him, breathing. That man, I don't know him. I swear to you, I don't know who sent him. I believe you, I say, and I mean it, which seems to unsettle him more than if I'd called him a liar. Because if it wasn't Garrick who sent a knife after me the second I walked back into this hall, that means somebody else already knows I'm alive. Somebody who decided the fastest solution was to make sure I stopped being alive again, quietly, before I could say another word. Sable Vane hasn't moved from where she stood a moment ago, but her eyes have gone somewhere else entirely, somewhere calculating and cold, and I catch the exact instant she reaches the same conclusion I just did. Her gaze flicks to the man on the floor, to his livery, to the guild crest stitched into his collar, and something in her expression closes like a door. She knows something. I file that away and keep my face flat. Great. Just great. I've been back in the capital for less than 5 minutes and somebody's already trying to erase me a second time. The guards haul the assassin away for questioning, though something in the set of Sable's jaw tells me whoever he answers to won't let him say anything useful before he goes quiet for good. The crowd is still frozen, still staring, whispering behind raised hands, and I realize with a strange, cold clarity that I have exactly one choice to make in the next 10 seconds that will define everything that happens after this. I can tell them everything. The bounty, the founding families, the dragon sealed alive under the capital's own foundation stones. I can burn Garrick and Sable down right here in front of witnesses and watch 200 years of careful noble lies collapse in a single afternoon. Or I can hold it back. The whisper in my skull doesn't tell me what to do. It never does, not really, not with words anyway, but I feel something underneath its silence that might be approval when I make my choice. And the choice is this. I say nothing. Not yet. A secret this big is a weapon, and a weapon you fire too early is just a warning shot that lets your enemy prepare. There's clearly a misunderstanding to sort out, I say instead, echoing Sable's own words back at her from a minute ago, watching her flinch at the sound of it. I think we should all take some time to figure out exactly what that misunderstanding is. It isn't a threat, not out loud, but everyone in that hall who's paying attention, and by now, everyone is paying attention, hears exactly what I mean underneath it. I know something. I'm choosing not to say it, and that unspoken thing is worse for Garrick and Sable than any accusation I could have shouted across the room, because now they have to spend every waking hour wondering exactly how much I know and when I'll decide to use it. I turn and walk out of the guild hall before either of them can find their voice again, and I don't look back, even though every instinct screaming under my skin wants to watch Garrick's face while the fear really sets in. The border town clothes I'd bought on the way back feel wrong on me as I walk the capital streets. too plain for a man who just harvested the will of something ancient enough to remember when this city was still a forest. People stare. Word travels fast in a place this size, faster than I expected. By the time I reach the inn where I've taken a room under a name that isn't mine, the innkeeper already knows who I am, already knows what happened in the guild hall an hour ago, and serves my food with hands that won't quite stop shaking. I eat alone. I always eat alone now. It's strange how quickly that becomes normal. The whisper keeps me company instead, threading through my thoughts while I chew food I can barely taste. You handled that well, it says. Better than I expected, for someone who spent 2 years apologizing for taking up space at a dinner table. Is that supposed to be a compliment? It's an observation. You've stopped flinching when people look at you. I don't have a response for that, mostly because it's true, and I hadn't noticed until it said it out loud in my head. 2 years of being the fifth wheel does something to a person. Wears grooves into the way you hold your shoulders, the way you apologize before anyone's even asked you to move. I spent so long trying to make myself smaller that I forgot what it felt like to take up the space I'm actually owed. Somewhere between the crawlers and the Hollow King's journal and the thing with green fire in its eyes, I stopped doing that. I didn't notice the moment it happened. I just noticed, sitting here now, that it already had. The knock on my door comes just after midnight. Soft, deliberate, 3 taps and a pause and 2 more. I'm on my feet before I consciously decide to move. Iron guard already humming under my skin in case this is another blade in the dark. But when I crack the door open, it isn't an assassin standing in the hallway shadow. It's Wren Calloway, hood pulled low, eyes red-rimmed like she hasn't slept properly since the moment I walked back through the guild doors, and something in my chest loosens just slightly at the sight of her, even though I still don't know whether I can trust anyone from my old life ever again. "Can I come in?" she says, and it isn't really a question. I step back and let her inside, and she moves fast, quiet, checking the window latch and the hallway behind her before she finally lets the door click shut. Old habits. She used to check every room like this before every raid, making sure nothing was waiting to ambush us mid-heal. Some things about a person don't change just because everything else did. "You look terrible," I tell her. Because it's true, and because I don't know yet how to say anything softer to her. "You look like you died and came back wrong," she says, and there's a flash of the old Wren in it, dry and sharp, before her face crumples and the words come tumbling out fast, like she's been holding them behind her teeth for 3 weeks, and the dam just gave. "Rowan, I need you to know. I didn't know." Not the details, not until it was already happening, but I knew something was wrong before the expedition. I felt it. Garrick was different for a week beforehand, jumpy, avoiding my eyes, and Sable kept pulling him into meetings I wasn't invited to, and I asked what was going on, and Garrick told me. She stops, swallows, her hands are shaking. "He told you what?" I say, quiet, careful, because I can already feel where this is going, and I need to hear her say it out loud. "He told me to stop asking questions I wouldn't like the answers to. And then Sable found me alone that same night and made it very clear what would happen to my family's guild contracts if I kept pushing." Her voice cracks on the last word. "I have a little sister training at the Healer's Academy, Rowan. Sable didn't threaten me. She threatened her. And I was a coward, and I said nothing, and 3 days later you fell into that pit and I told myself for 3 weeks that you were dead and it was my fault for staying quiet." The whisper in my skull goes very still, listening. I want to be angry at her. Some small bruised part of me reaches for the anger automatically, the way you reach for a scar to check it's still there. But underneath it there's something else. Something that remembers every time Wren stitched a wound closed with hands gentler than the situation demanded. Every quiet thank you she gave me when nobody else in that party remembered I existed outside of what I could identify for them. "You didn't push me," I say. "Garrick did. Sable planned it. You're not the one who pulled the lever. I could have warned you. And then what? Sable hurts your sister, I still fall, and now 2 of us are ruined instead of 1. I sit down on the edge of the bed, suddenly tired, in a way that has nothing to do with the fight 3 hours ago. "You made an impossible choice under threat. I don't blame you for it, Wren. I need you to hear that clearly, because I think you've been carrying it alone for 3 weeks, and it's eating you from the inside out." She doesn't cry exactly, but something in her shoulders finally drops, like a weight she'd forgotten she was still holding. We sit in silence for a moment, and then she looks up at me with an expression that's equal parts fear and determination, and asks the question I knew was coming the second she walked through that door. "What actually happened down there?" I tell her. Not everything. Some things I'm still not ready to say out loud to anyone, not even to the one person from my old life who's proven she's willing to risk everything to make things right. But I tell her about the skeleton, about the whisper, about the bloodline trait sitting dormant in my blood for 19 years, waiting for the exact moment I hit rock bottom to finally wake up. I tell her about the journal, about the Hollow King, about founding families and stolen dragon's blood and a debt 300 years old that nobody currently sitting in the capital's noble houses ever expected to have collected. Her face goes pale somewhere around the part about the Ashwood name showing up in the same founding-era records as Thorn. That's why he did it, she says, quiet, half to herself. Not the bounty, not really. That was just the excuse Sable handed him. That's my read on it too. Rowan. She leans forward, and her voice drops even lower, urgent now. If Sable knows the Ashwood bloodline is real, and you just walked back into the capital very obviously alive, and very obviously changed, she's not going to sit still and wonder. She's going to start digging. Records, archives, old contracts, anything that tells her exactly what you are now and how dangerous that makes you. Let her dig. That's not reassurance. That's a dare. I almost smile at that, the first real almost smile I've managed since I climbed out of the abyss. Good. Let her take it as one. Ren stays another hour, filling in details I didn't have. How the guild quietly closed my case as a training death within a week of the fall. How Garrick's stock with the crown rose sharply right after. How there's been a strange amount of royal interest in the Outer Ring bounty ever since. More than a simple monster culling contract should ever attract. By the time she leaves, slipping back out into the dark the same careful way she came in, I have more pieces of the picture than I did an hour ago, and every single one of them makes the whole thing uglier. I don't sleep. I sit by the window instead, watching the capital's lamplight flicker against the rooftops, and I let the whisper talk. Because somewhere in the last 3 weeks, I stopped finding its voice unsettling, and started finding it almost like company. They will come for you again, it says. Tonight's attempt was clumsy. The next one won't be. Comforting. I am not here to comfort you. I am here to make sure you survive long enough to finish what was started 300 years ago. And if I don't want to finish it, if I just want my life back. The silence that follows is longer than usual, and when the whisper finally answers, there's something almost gentle underneath the ancient, patient weight of it. You don't want your old life back. You want them to know they were wrong about you. Those are not the same thing, little harvester. One of those things is already true. I don't have an answer for that, mostly because it's right, and I hate how easily it sees through me. The next 2 days pass in a strange, tense quiet. I don't go looking for Garrick or Sable, and they don't come looking for me either, though I catch signs of Sable's attention everywhere I turn. A guild clerk asking careful questions about my recovery, a records archivist who suddenly can't meet my eyes when I pass her in the hallway, a message runner who lingers a half-second too long outside my inn before hurrying off. She's building a file on me. I'd be flattered if it wasn't so obviously the first move in a much larger game. On the second night, I finally understand what the whisper meant about my skills evolving. I'm walking back from the market square, nothing dramatic, just buying food like anyone with an actual life would, when Windstep triggers on its own 3 full seconds before I hear the crossbow bolt that would have taken me through the throat. My body simply moves. Sideways, low, silent, and the bolt buries itself in a wooden stall behind where I'd been standing a heartbeat earlier, and I'm already scanning the rooftops before my conscious mind has finished catching up to what just happened. Nobody visible. Whoever fired is already gone, already melted back into the crowd or the alleys, professional enough to not stick around and confirm the kill. I stand there in the market square with my heart hammering and a crossbow bolt quivering in splintered wood, 3 inches from a stranger's stall, and I realize, cold and clear, that my body reacted to a threat before I even knew the threat existed. That's twice now. The assassin's blade. This bolt. Both times, some part of me that isn't fully conscious anymore made the call before I did. I finally understand it that night, alone in my room, staring at my own hands like I'm meeting them for the first time. The skills I harvested aren't separate tools I choose to use anymore. They're becoming part of the same reflex loop that used to just be instinct. Fight or flight rewired with 3 centuries of borrowed muscle memory sitting underneath it, ready to fire the instant real danger crosses some threshold I don't consciously control. It should feel like power. Mostly it does. But there's a thin, cold thread of fear running under the power too, because if my body is already making decisions without me, I have to wonder how much further that goes before there's a version of Rowan Ashwood standing in this room that isn't entirely me anymore. The whisper, for once, doesn't offer comfort or explanation. It just says, "Quiet. You are becoming what you need to be to survive what's coming. Try not to fear that. Fear is what got you thrown into a pit in the first place." I don't sleep much that night either. The summons comes on the fourth morning, delivered by a royal courier in palace colors so crisp they look freshly pressed, standing stiff and formal outside my inn door like the whole street should know exactly how important this errand is. He doesn't ask permission to speak. He simply produces a sealed letter, palace crest pressed into black wax, and holds it out at arm's length like he'd rather not be standing this close to whatever I am. "Rowan Ashwood," he says, reading off a slip of parchment even though we both already know who I am. "By order of the crown, you are summoned to appear before the royal court within 3 days' time, regarding an irregularity in your recorded status." My status. You are, according to official record, missing and presumed dead. His eyes flick over me, taking in the fact that I am, very obviously, neither. The crown wishes to correct that record. Quietly, and with your full cooperation. I take the letter. The wax seal is still warm from wherever they pressed it, and something about that detail makes the whole thing feel worse. Not a formality drafted days ago and left to travel slowly across the capital, but something urgent enough that they sealed it and sent it the same morning, the same hour, maybe within minutes of deciding I was a problem that needed handling. "Quietly," I repeat. Those were the exact words in my instructions, yes. The courier shifts, uncomfortable now, like he can feel something in the air he doesn't have the vocabulary to name. The court does not typically extend personal summons to survivors of the Outer Ring. I would advise you not to be late. He leaves without waiting for a response, boots sharp against the cobblestones, and I stand there in my doorway holding a letter with the royal crest pressed into black wax, and the whisper in my skull goes very quiet. The particular kind of quiet that means it's paying very close attention. 3 weeks ago, nobody in the capital knew my name well enough to remember it at a dinner party. Now the crown itself wants me standing in front of the throne within 3 days, quietly, to correct a record that, until 4 minutes ago, listed me as conveniently, permanently dead. I think about the Hollow King's journal, about founding families and stolen bloodlines and a dragon's bones holding up the very palace that just sent a courier to my door. I think about a bounty contract that only pays out for 4 names, not 5, and a royal court that's apparently very interested in making sure I don't stay a loose thread much longer. Somebody in that palace knows exactly what I am, and they didn't send this letter to welcome me home.